They laughed when Samuel Carter spent his last $5 on a horse everyone else had already buried in their minds. The late afternoon sun hung low over Dust Valley, Texas, spilling copper light across the auction yard and casting long skeletal shadows through the warped wooden rails. Wind pushed dry earth in restless spirals, coating boots, denim, and broken dreams alike in a thin layer of red dust. Beneath the rusted tin roof of the livestock barn, men leaned against fence posts with crossed arms, their weathered faces carved by drought and skepticism. Women fanned themselves with folded sail sheets. Children stood on tiptoe, hoping for excitement in a place where mercy rarely made headlines. Samuel Carter stood near the back, his broad shoulders slightly bent from years of labor, grief, and too many seasons that had taken more than they'd given. At 48, the widowed rancher looked older than the land he fought to keep alive. His boots were cracked, his hat sweat-stained, and in his front pocket rested the final $5 bill separating his family from complete emptiness. He hadn't come for miracles. He'd come for feed bargains, old tack, maybe some fencing wire cheap enough to patch another failing corner of his ranch. But then they brought her out. The mare stumbled through the side gate with the slow, fragile heaviness of something the world had already discarded. She was enormous, taller than any horse Samuel had seen in years, her once magnificent frame now reduced to jutting ribs beneath a faded chestnut coat streaked with dirt and neglect. Her swollen belly shifted with the unmistakable weight of late pregnancy, yet her legs trembled beneath her mass as if each breath demanded more strength than she had left. Scars lined her flanks like faded road maps of hardship. One eye was half-lidded from exhaustion, but the other still burned. Beneath pain, beneath starvation, beneath the humiliation of being paraded before laughing strangers, there remained a spark of fierce and ancient dignity. The auctioneer's voice crackled through the static-heavy loudspeaker. "Giant mare, likely won't survive delivery. Starting bid, $20. Silence answered. A man near the front scoffed. "You'd spend more burying her." Laughter rolled through the barn like distant thunder. $10, the auctioneer tried again, his tone already surrendering. Nothing. Belle swayed where she stood, her massive body shifting protectively around the life inside her. Samuel's jaw tightened. Something about the way she remained standing, despite every reason to collapse, stirred a place inside him he thought the years had hardened beyond feeling. $5, the auctioneer muttered, almost mockingly. Anybody? The laughter grew louder. But Samuel stepped forward. His boots echoed against old planks as heads turned. From his pocket, he pulled the last bill he owned, worn soft from too much folding and too little spending. "I'll take her." For one suspended moment, even the wind seemed to stop. Then came the laughter. Sharp. Ruthless. Predictable. Carter's finally lost his mind. That horse'll die before morning. Bankrupt and buying ghosts. But Samuel didn't look at them. He only looked at the mare. As he approached, her weary head lifted slightly. Her nostrils flared. And in the fading Texas light, Samuel noticed something beneath the grime on her shoulder, a strange silver brand, nearly hidden, glinting like a buried secret. Belle lowered her head, not in defeat, but in recognition. And as Samuel took hold of the rope, he had the unsettling feeling that he hadn't just bought a dying horse. He had just stepped into a story far bigger than his last $5 could explain. The trailer rattled like an old prayer struggling to hold together as Samuel Carter guided his battered Ford pickup down the long dirt road toward Broken Ridge Ranch. Dust billowed behind him in red clouds, curling through the dry Texas twilight as the sun sank lower, bleeding gold and amber across the endless plains. Inside the rusted trailer, Belle shifted carefully with each jolt, her weakened body swaying under the burden of exhaustion and the precious life she still carried. Samuel kept one rough hand steady on the wheel, but his eyes flicked constantly to the side mirror, watching for every stumble, every sign that the mare might collapse before they made it home. "Just hold on a little longer," he murmured, his voice nearly swallowed by the groan of old tires over cracked earth. "You made it this far." The ranch waited at the edge of nowhere, 200 worn acres that had once promised prosperity but now stood tired and weather-beaten beneath years of drought. Fences sagged. The barn roof dipped slightly under age and neglect. Windmills turned slow and hollow, squeaking against the evening breeze like ghosts remembering better seasons. Samuel's daughter, 16-year-old Emma Carter, stood on the porch when the truck finally rolled through the gate. Her blonde braid danced in the wind as her worried blue eyes narrowed at the sight of the trailer. She had inherited her late mother's softness, though hardship had already begun carving strength into her young face. "Dad," she called, stepping down from the porch steps. "Please tell me you did not spend money we do not have on another broken animal." Samuel killed the engine, the sudden silence hanging heavy in the fading light. For a moment, he simply sat there, exhaustion pressing against him like the weight of every bad season before this one. Then he opened the truck door and climbed down slowly. $5, he admitted. Emma froze. $5. Her voice cracked between disbelief and frustration. "That was our feed money." Samuel nodded once, tired but certain. "I know." He opened the trailer gate with careful hands. Belle stood trembling in the dim interior, her massive silhouette framed by the last orange rays of sunset. Emma's expression shifted the instant she saw the mare's swollen belly. "Oh no," she whispered, stepping closer. "She is pregnant." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Very." Belle attempted a step, but her front leg buckled slightly. Samuel immediately moved beside her, steadying her massive shoulder with gentle firmness. "Easy, girl." To Emma's surprise, the mare obeyed, lowering her head with fragile trust. As Belle carefully descended the ramp, her labored breathing filled the quiet yard. Every rib showed. Every movement looked like borrowed strength. Yet beneath her battered condition, there remained an undeniable majesty, something ancient and powerful that neglect had failed to erase. Emma reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing Belle's neck. The mare flinched at first, then softened beneath the girl's touch. "She is beautiful," Emma said quietly, emotion replacing protest. Samuel glanced at the strange silver brand again as lantern light from the barn caught its faded outline. It was no ordinary ranch mark. There was craftsmanship in it. Purpose. Mystery. "She was not always meant for an auction yard," he said softly. Together, father and daughter guided Belle into the old barn, where fresh hay, cool water, and lantern glow offered the first true shelter she had likely known in years. But as Belle settled uneasily into the stall, Emma noticed something that made her breath catch. The mare's belly shifted hard beneath her skin. A powerful kick from within. Samuel saw it too. In the trembling quiet of the barn, beneath weathered beams and swirling dust motes, one truth became impossible to ignore. Belle was not simply fighting for her own life. She was carrying something extraordinary. Morning arrived slowly over Broken Ridge Ranch, spilling pale gold across brittle fields and weather-worn fences as if the land itself was cautiously deciding whether hope still belonged there. Inside the old barn, the scent of hay, cedar dust, and warm animal breath replaced the bitterness of auction dirt. Samuel Carter had slept little, his body stiff from hours spent in a wooden chair outside Belle's stall, lantern in hand, listening to every strained breath she took through the long Texas night. More than once, he had feared the silence would come. But each time, Belle remained standing, battered yet unbroken, her dark eye watching him with a wary intelligence that felt less like ownership and more like fragile partnership. Emma arrived just after sunrise carrying a dented metal bucket of oats soaked soft with molasses and warm water. "You should eat something too," she said, though her attention stayed fixed on the mare. Samuel gave a tired smile beneath the brim of his old hat. "She comes first." Belle's condition was still grave. Her ribs pressed sharply against her faded coat, and her swollen belly made every movement look like a test of endurance. Yet as the days unfolded, something remarkable began to take root in the quiet rhythm of care. Samuel brushed the dust from her coat each morning with slow, patient strokes. Emma cleaned her wounds, changed bandages, and whispered softly while doing so, as though kindness itself carried healing. They fed her small portions throughout the day, careful not to overwhelm her starved body. Fresh water. Alfalfa. Time. Mercy. And Belle responded. By the end of the first week, her breathing had steadied. Her dull coat began to reveal flashes of deep chestnut beneath the grime. The hollow despair in her frame softened ever so slightly. She even began greeting Emma with a low nicker each morning, her massive head lowering gently into the girl's shoulder as though recognizing safety for the first time in years. Samuel noticed something else too. Belle was fiercely protective of her unborn foal. Whenever strangers approached, her body shifted instinctively, positioning herself between danger and the life she carried. It was this protective strength, hidden beneath weakness, that stirred Samuel most. One afternoon, while carefully brushing Belle's shoulder, Samuel studied the strange silver brand more closely. Dust and neglect had nearly concealed it, but now the symbol stood clearer, an elegant crest unlike any common ranch marking, intricate and deliberate. Emma traced it lightly with her fingers. "What does it mean?" she asked. Samuel's weathered face darkened with thought. "I do not know. But horses like her do not end up sold for $5 unless somebody wanted their story forgotten." The mystery deepened days later when old Doc Harris, the county veterinarian, arrived in his faded pickup. After examining Belle thoroughly, the silver-haired vet removed his glasses with visible disbelief. "Samuel," he said slowly, "this mare is no ordinary draft cross." Samuel frowned. "What do you mean?" Doc glanced again at the brand. "She carries bloodlines I have only seen once before. Massive build, rare endurance traits, and if I am right," he paused, almost reverent, "this mare may descend from one of the last protected imperial Mustang breeding lines." Emma's eyes widened. Samuel stood silent. "You are telling me someone threw away a horse worth a fortune?" Doc Harris shook his head. "No. I am telling you someone may have discarded something far more dangerous." Outside, dry wind stirred across the ranch, rattling old fence wire like a warning carried from the past. Inside the barn, Belle shifted, and her belly moved again with startling force. Samuel rested a steady hand against her side, feeling the powerful life within. In that moment, beneath the soft lantern glow and the weight of hidden truths, Samuel understood one thing with certainty. He had not rescued a forgotten animal. He had unknowingly opened the door to a buried legacy. Word spread through Dust Valley the way storms rolled across open plains, quiet at first, then all at once. By the second week, whispers about Samuel Carter's $5 mare had drifted from feed stores to church porches, from rusted gas stations to polished ranch offices where wealthy men preferred their boots clean and their profits cleaner. Most dismissed it as another poor man's foolish gamble. But others, especially those old enough to recognize forgotten bloodlines, grew curious. Broken Ridge Ranch had not seen visitors in months, yet now trucks occasionally slowed along the road, their drivers studying the Carter property with narrowed eyes before moving on. Samuel noticed every one of them. Belle noticed too. Her strength continued returning with a resilience that seemed almost unnatural. The deep hollows along her sides began to fill. Her coat, once dulled by starvation, now shimmered copper-red beneath the Texas sun when Emma brushed her each morning. Even her posture had changed. She no longer stood like a creature waiting to die. She stood like something remembering who she had once been. Yet for all her growing health, Belle remained restless. Often, Samuel would find her staring beyond the pasture fence toward the western horizon, ears sharp, body tense, as though listening for distant ghosts carried on dry wind. "It is like she is waiting for something," Emma said one evening as sunset painted the barn walls gold. Samuel leaned against the stall gate, his weathered eyes thoughtful. Or hiding from it. Their answer came 3 days later. A black Cadillac, polished so brightly it looked unnatural against the dust and drought, rolled slowly up the Carter driveway. Samuel stepped out onto the porch before the engine even stopped. The man who emerged wore pressed slacks, expensive boots untouched by labor, and a silver belt buckle that spoke louder than his smile. Richard Holloway. Owner of Holloway Equine Holdings, one of the wealthiest breeding operations in 3 states. Samuel recognized him immediately, though men like Holloway rarely noticed men like Carter. "Mr. Carter," Holloway said smoothly, removing his hat. I hear you acquired an interesting mare. Samuel's jaw tightened. She is not for sale. Holloway's smile flickered, but only slightly. I did not ask if she was. Emma appeared quietly at her father's side, tension rising like heat off summer ground. Holloway's sharp eyes drifted toward Belle's stall. For the briefest moment, his polished confidence cracked. Recognition. That brand, he said softly, almost to himself. Samuel said nothing. Holloway stepped closer, lowering his voice. You have no idea what you are keeping in that barn. Samuel's expression remained stone. Then enlighten me. Holloway exhaled slowly, as though deciding how much truth to reveal. Years ago, a private breeding initiative was built around preserving the Imperial Mustang line. Strength, intelligence, endurance. Horses worth hundreds of thousands. Belle was one of the foundation mares. Emma's breath caught. What happened? Holloway's gaze darkened. Corruption. Greed. Certain investors wanted faster profits. When Belle became pregnant unexpectedly by one of the last purebred sires, she became both priceless and inconvenient. Silence fell heavy as iron. Samuel felt cold despite the Texas heat. So someone discarded her. Holloway looked away. Someone tried to erase her. Inside the barn, Belle shifted hard, protective instinct radiating through her towering frame. Samuel placed a steady hand against her neck. Holloway reached into his coat and offered a business card. When that foal is born, people will come. Some with money. Some with motives far worse. If you are wise, Carter, you will call me first. Samuel did not take the card immediately. He looked instead at Belle, at the mare once abandoned to die carrying a secret powerful men had tried to bury. Then he met Holloway's gaze with quiet steel. She is not property anymore. For the first time, Holloway's polished expression showed something rare. Respect. As night settled over Broken Ridge Ranch and the Cadillac disappeared into drifting dust, Samuel understood the storm gathering around his family was no longer about survival alone. Belle's foal was not merely a miracle waiting to be born. It was living proof of a truth powerful enough to threaten the kind of men who believed everything could be bought. The sky above Broken Ridge Ranch turned strange 3 days before the storm arrived. Old ranchers in Dust Valley often said Texas weather spoke first in silence, and Samuel Carter knew enough hard seasons to recognize the warning. The wind shifted west. Birds vanished from fence posts. The horizon darkened beneath bruised clouds that stretched low and heavy like an iron curtain being pulled across the plains. Belle felt it too. Her massive body had grown stronger, but now unease moved through her like electricity. She paced her stall with slow, deliberate circles, ears pinned toward the distant thunder, her protective instincts sharpening with every passing hour. Samuel stood by the barn doors that evening, studying the black wall gathering across the land. This is going to be bad, he muttered. Emma tightened her jacket against the rising wind. How close is she? Samuel glanced toward Belle's swollen frame, then toward the mare's restless movements. Too close for trouble. By nightfall, the storm struck with the full fury of untamed nature. Wind slammed against the ranch house hard enough to rattle windows in their frames. Rain came sideways, slicing through the dark in silver sheets. Thunder rolled so deeply it seemed to shake the earth beneath their boots. Broken Ridge, already worn thin by years of hardship, groaned under the assault. Loose! Shutters tore free. Fence lines snapped. The old barn shuddered beneath each violent gust. Then Belle cried out. It was not fear alone. It was pain. Samuel's blood ran cold. Emma, lanterns, he shouted, already pulling on his coat. They ran through mud and rain toward the barn, fighting wind that clawed at them like invisible hands. Inside, chaos greeted them. Hay swirled through broken gaps in the wooden walls. Lantern light danced wildly against trembling beams. Belle's massive body strained inside her stall, muscles tightening, breath coming in sharp, desperate bursts. She is in labor, Emma gasped. Samuel's jaw clenched. Too early, and in this. Another thunderous crack split the sky. Part of the barn roof groaned overhead, old timber protesting decades of weather and neglect. Samuel wasted no time. We keep her calm. No matter what. Belle's eyes rolled with pain, but when Samuel reached her side, his hand firm against her neck, something shifted. She steadied. Not because the storm lessened, but because trust had taken root stronger than fear. Easy, girl, he said, his voice low and unwavering despite the storm raging around them. You are not alone. For hours, father and daughter fought beside her. Emma dried Belle's trembling sides with old blankets. Samuel reinforced weakened stall boards and braced leaking beams as best he could. Rainwater dripped through the fractured roof. Lightning flashed through every crack, turning the barn into a battlefield of shadow and gold. Outside, nature seemed determined to erase everything fragile. But inside, something far stronger refused to surrender. Then disaster nearly struck. A violent gust ripped loose a section of roofing near the far stall, sending timber crashing down with a deafening roar. Belle reared in panic, shielding her belly instinctively. Samuel lunged without hesitation, pulling heavy debris aside before it could block her space. His shoulder screamed in protest, but he never faltered. Emma's voice broke through tears and thunder alike. Dad! Samuel turned, rain-soaked and breathless. Keep her focused. Belle groaned again, lower this time, deeper. Labor was advancing. Samuel pressed his forehead briefly against the mare's trembling neck, lantern light catching the silver brand like a buried crown in the storm. Fight, he whispered. You have come too far to lose now. Outside, Dust Valley disappeared beneath rain and darkness. But within the battered barn, beneath collapsing wood and roaring skies, one truth became undeniable. This was no longer simply survival. It was a battle for legacy itself. And as the storm howled across Texas, Samuel Carter, his daughter, and the dying mare the world had discarded stood together against it, refusing to let the coming miracle be buried before it had its first breath. Thunder shook Broken Ridge Ranch as though heaven itself had descended upon the Texas plains, but inside the battered barn, all of Samuel Carter's world had narrowed to one desperate struggle beneath flickering lantern light. Rain hammered the roof in relentless waves, wind screamed through broken boards, and Belle's mighty body trembled with exhaustion as labor pushed her beyond every known limit. Her breath came in ragged bursts, steam rising from her chest like smoke from a battlefield. Emma knelt near Belle's shoulder, her trembling hand steady despite fear as she whispered soft encouragement into the mare's sweat-dampened Mare. Come on, girl, she pleaded, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. You can do this. Samuel remained at Belle's side, one weathered hand pressed firmly against her neck, grounding her through pain and chaos alike. He had seen drought strip fields bare. He had seen death take his wife too young. He had watched his ranch wither year by year beneath debt and unforgiving seasons. But never had he witnessed such fierce determination as the one raging now inside the creature everyone else had abandoned. Belle was not merely surviving. She was fighting for something sacred. Another surge overtook her. Belle cried out, her powerful frame straining beneath the impossible weight of birth and storm alike. Then, for one terrifying moment, everything seemed to stop. The wind outside roared. Lightning split the sky in blinding white. Samuel's heart pounded as silence hung suspended between one breath and the next. Dad! Emma whispered, fear cracking her voice. Samuel crouched lower, his experienced eyes fixed carefully. Then he saw movement. I see it, he said, disbelief and hope colliding in his voice. Emma. I see the foal. The next moments felt eternal. Belle summoned strength that should not have remained in her battered body. With one final, earth-shaking effort, she delivered. A flash of lightning illuminated the barn just as new life emerged into the storm-dark world. Silence followed. Complete. Sacred. Even the storm itself seemed to pause. Then came the sound. A sharp, powerful cry unlike anything either Carter had expected. Emma gasped. Samuel froze. Lying in the hay beneath Belle was not the fragile, struggling foal they had feared. It was enormous. Long-legged. Strong. Its coat, still slick from birth, gleamed an extraordinary burnished gold beneath lantern light, richer and rarer than anything Samuel had ever seen. Across its broad forehead stretched a brilliant white blaze in the unmistakable shape of a rising flame. The colt moved almost immediately, powerful legs fighting for balance with astonishing force. "Good Lord," Samuel whispered, his voice nearly stolen by awe. Belle, exhausted but victorious, lowered her massive head and touched her foal gently, a deep, rumbling nicker vibrating through the barn like ancient triumph. Emma covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. "He is beautiful." But beauty alone was not what left them speechless. It was presence. Even moments after birth, the colt carried himself with an impossible dignity, his dark eyes alert and intelligent, as though something legendary had arrived wearing the form of new life. Doc Harris, who had braved the storm after Samuel's emergency call, stepped into the stall moments later. One look at the foal stopped the old veterinarian cold. His weathered face went pale beneath his rain-soaked hat. "Samuel," he said slowly, reverently. "Do you understand what you have here?" Samuel, still kneeling in the straw, looked from Belle to the colt who had already begun trying to stand. "No," he answered honestly. Doc Harris removed his glasses, his voice nearly trembling. "This colt is not just rare." He swallowed hard. "He may be the most valuable imperial Mustang born in over half a century." Outside, the storm slowly began to break, dawn's first faint silver stretching across the battered horizon. Inside the broken barn, where the world had expected only death, a miracle now stood on trembling golden legs. Samuel reached out, resting his rough hand gently against the colt's neck. "Titan," he whispered. And as morning light touched the newborn's shining coat for the very first time, it became clear to all who witnessed it that $5 had not purchased a dying mare. It had delivered a legend. By sunrise, the storm had passed, but Broken Ridge Ranch no longer looked like the same forgotten patch of Texas dust it had been just one day before. Rainwater clung to splintered fence posts. Mud slicked the yard. Sections of barn roofing lay scattered like broken relics across soaked earth. Yet beneath the damage, beneath the exhaustion, something extraordinary had taken root. Inside the weathered stall, Belle rested with the quiet dignity of a queen who had survived both betrayal and nature's fury. Beside her stood Titan, still unsteady but impossibly powerful, his golden coat already drying into a rich burnished sheen that caught the morning sun like polished fire. His white blaze glowed brilliantly, unmistakable and regal, and every attempt he made to steady his long legs carried a strength that seemed far beyond his first hours of life. Samuel Carter stood in silence, leaning against the stall gate, his hat held low in his rough hands. He had spent years fighting simply to hold on to his ranch. But now, for the first time in longer than he could remember, he was staring not at survival, but at possibility. Doc Harris remained equally shaken. He had delivered hundreds of foals in his lifetime, from common ranch stock to champion bloodlines, but never had he seen anything quite like this. He carefully examined Titan beneath the soft barn light, his weathered fingers tracing the colt's muscular shoulders, broad chest, an unusually distinct silver marking hidden beneath the golden hair near his flank. Then Doc froze. "Samuel," he said quietly, almost as though afraid to speak too loudly. "This confirms it." Samuel looked up sharply. "Confirms what?" Doc removed his glasses, his lined face pale with disbelief. "This colt carries the royal sovereign crest." Emma stepped closer, confusion clouding her expression. "What does that mean?" Doc's voice lowered with reverence. "It means Titan is not merely part of the Imperial Mustang line. He may be direct bloodline from Sovereign's gold." Samuel's brow furrowed. Even he knew the name. Sovereign's Gold had been one of the rarest and most celebrated breeding stallions in modern equine history, a near-mythic horse whose offspring were worth fortunes and whose bloodline had supposedly vanished decades ago after scandal, corruption, and greed shattered the breeding empire built around him. That line was lost, Samuel said. Doc nodded slowly. That is what everyone believed. Outside, the quiet rumble of engines disturbed the fragile peace. Samuel's jaw tightened as multiple trucks approached the ranch. Expensive trucks. Polished. Purposeful. Word had spread faster than wind. By mid-morning, Holloway Equine Holdings representatives arrived, followed by breeders, investors, and even reporters from Dallas eager to witness the miracle foal born from a dying mare sold for $5. Offers came quickly. $50,000. $100,000. Then more. Men who once would have laughed at Samuel now removed their hats and spoke with forced respect. But Samuel remained unmoved. He stood beside Bell and Titan not as a desperate rancher, but as a guardian. They are not for sale, he said, his voice steady as old oak. Some scoffed. Others pushed harder. Yet Samuel's refusal only deepened when Doc Harris privately revealed the full truth. Bell's disappearance years ago had not been an accident. She had been intentionally removed from the breeding world after corrupt investors sought control of her unborn line, willing to erase evidence rather than lose power. Titan's existence was living proof of what had been stolen. This foal, Doc said gravely, could expose one of the largest cover-ups in modern horse breeding. Samuel looked at Bell, at the mare discarded like trash. Despite carrying a dynasty, and then at Titan, whose every breath represented justice long delayed. Then they were never meant to own him, Samuel replied. As cameras flashed and wealthy buyers circled, the Carter Ranch no longer symbolized poverty or ruin. It had become sacred ground. The place where greed had failed, kindness had prevailed, and buried truth now stood on for golden legs beneath the Texas sun. The weeks that followed transformed Broken Ridge Ranch from a place of quiet struggle into the center of a storm far greater than weather. News of Titan's birth spread across Texas and beyond, carried by headlines, ranch journals, and television crews eager to capture the golden colt whose existence threatened to unravel decades of carefully buried corruption. Trucks lined the dirt road daily now. Wealthy breeders. Journalists. Lawyers. Some came with admiration. Others came with contracts. But Samuel Carter had learned enough from hardship to recognize when smiles hid sharper intentions. He refused every offer, no matter how large. $200,000. $500,000. A full million from private investors desperate to secure Titan's bloodline before legal truth surfaced. No amount of money, Samuel told them, standing firm beneath his old hat and weathered coat, will ever buy what kindness already claimed. Yet not everyone accepted rejection gracefully. One crisp morning, Richard Holloway returned, this time not as a cautious businessman, but as a man carrying dangerous truths. He arrived with legal files, historical breeding records, and names Samuel had never heard but would never forget. Investors. Executives. Breeders who had once manipulated entire bloodlines for profit. Bell was hidden because she carried proof, Holloway explained across Samuel's kitchen table. When Sovereign's Gold's final legitimate line became pregnant outside investor control, they erased her from records, sold her through shell auctions, and expected her to disappear forever. Emma's young face hardened with disbelief. They tried to bury her alive in the system. Holloway nodded grimly. And Titan's birth just exposed all of it. What followed shook the equine world. Investigations reopened. Fraud cases resurfaced. Illegal breeding contracts were uncovered. Men once praised as titans of industry were suddenly forced into public scrutiny. The mare sold for $5 had become the key witness greed never accounted for. Reporters camped outside ranch gates. Industry boards launched inquiries. Wealthy ranch empires trembled under the weight of evidence hidden in Bell's silver brand and Titan's royal crest. But while powerful men scrambled to protect reputations, Samuel focused only on what mattered. Bell's healing. Titan's growth. Emma's future. Through it all, Titan flourished beyond expectation. By 3 months old, his size, intelligence, and commanding presence were unlike anything experts had predicted. He moved with rare grace, his golden frame growing stronger each day under wide Texas skies. Yet despite his value, despite his legacy, Titan remained deeply bonded to the family who had saved him. He followed Emma through pastures like a loyal shadow. He responded to Samuel's voice with calm authority. And Belle, once discarded and nearly destroyed, watched over them both with fierce, maternal pride. Eventually, the courts ruled in favor of Samuel's lawful ownership. Belle and Titan were his. Fully. Permanently. The investors who had once treated life as inventory lost more than money. They lost control. On the day the final ruling became public, Samuel stood at the pasture fence as cameras clicked and reporters shouted questions about fortune, breeding rights, and future profits. But Samuel only rested one hand on Belle's neck while Titan grazed nearby beneath the setting sun. This was never about wealth, he said quietly. It was about giving something broken the chance to live. His words echoed far beyond Dust Valley. Across ranches, auction barns, and homes alike, people saw not merely a legal victory, but something far rarer. Justice. The poor rancher once mocked for spending his final $5 had not only saved a dying mare. He had exposed greed, restored a stolen legacy, and reminded a cynical world that true worth is not measured by price tags or pedigrees, but by the courage to choose. Compassion when others choose convenience. By the following spring, Broken Ridge Ranch no longer stood as a symbol of survival alone. It had become something far rarer on the Texas plains, a place where broken things had been restored, where forgotten bloodlines ran free beneath open skies, and where one man's final act of compassion had reshaped generations to come. Winter rains had softened the land. Wild grass rolled green across fields once cracked by drought. Repaired fences stretched strong beneath bright sun. The old barn, rebuilt board by board with honest earnings and community respect, stood taller now, its fresh cedar beams carrying none of the despair that had once clung to its weathered frame. Samuel Carter often paused at sunrise on his porch, coffee warming his rough hands, watching the miracle he had nearly missed. Belle had fully recovered, her once-starved body transformed into the majestic giant she had always been meant to be. Her copper coat gleamed richly beneath morning light, and the sorrow that once shadowed her eyes had long since given way to peace. She moved through the pastures with quiet strength, no longer hunted by the ghosts of betrayal. And beside her ran Titan. At just under a year old, the Golden Colt had already become the living legend experts predicted, yet even they had underestimated the force of his spirit. Massive, graceful, and fiercely intelligent, Titan carried himself with a regal presence that stopped visitors in their tracks. His white blaze shone like fire beneath the Texas sun, and every thunderous stride across the ranch seemed to echo something ancient and unbreakable. But despite his extraordinary value, Titan remained what Samuel and Emma cherished most, a reminder. A reminder that miracles often arrive disguised as burdens. That greatness is sometimes hidden beneath scars, dust, and dismissal. That the world's rejected can still carry heaven's rarest gifts. Breeding organizations offered fortunes. Media companies proposed documentaries. Investors continued circling. Yet Samuel refused to turn Titan into a commodity. Instead, Broken Ridge evolved into a sanctuary for neglected horses, funded partly by carefully protected breeding rights and partly by something money could never purchase, integrity. Together, Samuel and Emma rescued abandoned animals from auctions, roadside neglect, and broken systems, giving them the same chance Belle had once been given. People came from across America not merely to see Titan, but to witness what kindness had built. School children visited. Veterans found healing in the ranch's quiet rhythms. Families struggling through hardship saw proof that endings are not always what they seem. And through it all, Samuel remained the same weathered rancher who had once spent his last $5 on a dying mare because leaving her behind felt more costly than poverty itself. One golden evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the horizon in deep amber, Emma stood by the pasture fence watching Titan race beside Belle through swaying grass. "Mom would have loved this," she said softly. Samuel's eyes stayed fixed on the horses, his lined face softened by memory and gratitude. "Yeah," he replied. "I think she already does." The wind moved gently through the fields, carrying the sound of hooves, breath, and life renewed. In that quiet, Samuel understood something greater than fortune had taken root on his land. Legacy was never about wealth, titles, or power. It was about what a soul chooses to save when the world says something is worthless. Belle had delivered more than a legendary foal. She had restored a family, exposed corruption, healed a broken ranch, and proven, beyond all doubt, that sometimes the weakest, most forgotten life carries the strongest miracle of all. Under the endless Texas sky, where dust once marked despair, hope now ran wild.